Jasmine Crockett wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She grew up in a small, modest neighborhood where life wasn't always easy. Her family worked hard to make ends meet, and from a young age she learned the value of determination and grit. But what set Jasmine apart was her sharp mind and an unshakable belief in fairness. Even as a child, she couldn't stand seeing someone treated unjustly. Whether it was sticking up for a classmate being bullied or questioning why certain rules were unfair, Jasmine's voice always seemed to rise above the noise. As she grew older, her passion for justice only deepened. After finishing school, she decided to study law, knowing it was one of the best ways to fight for what was right. Law school wasn't easy. There were late nights spent studying, tough exams, and moments when self-doubt crept in. But Jasmine pushed through all of it. She didn't just want to be a lawyer, she wanted to be a force for change. And once she graduated, she wasted no time putting her skills to work. Jasmine chose to focus on cases that others might shy away from, those involving people who had little money, few connections, and nowhere else to turn. These were the underdogs, the forgotten ones, and Jasmine made it her mission to give them a fighting chance. Her reputation quickly spread, not just because she won cases, but because she genuinely cared about the people she represented. Clients often said they felt like Jasmine wasn't just their attorney but also their ally, someone who truly understood their struggles. But while Jasmine gained respect from many, she also attracted enemies. Not everyone appreciated her fearless approach to exposing wrongdoing. Some powerful figures saw her as a threat, a disruptor to the status quo. Among them was a judge whose name carried weight in legal circles. This judge, known for his stern demeanor and commanding presence, had built a career on bending the rules to suit himself. Behind closed doors, he operated in a world of bribes and backdoor deals, ensuring that justice leaned in favor of those who could pay. For years, this judge had managed to stay untouchable, weaving a web of corruption so intricate that few dared to challenge him. But Jasmine's rise caught his attention, and not in a good way. To him, she represented everything he despised: transparency, honesty, and a refusal to play by his twisted rules. He saw her growing influence as a direct threat to his power. If someone like Jasmine continued to shine a light on the cracks in the system, his carefully constructed empire could come crashing down. So the judge began watching her closely, waiting for an opportunity to strike. He thought if he could find a way to humiliate her publicly, it would send a clear message: don't cross me. Little did he know that his plan to take Jasmine down would unravel in ways he never imagined. What started as a simple courtroom hearing would soon spiral into a dramatic confrontation, one that would leave the entire community talking and change Jasmine's life forever. The stage was set, and neither Jasmine nor the judge realized how pivotal the next few days would be. For Jasmine, it was another day of standing up for what was right. For the judge, it was a chance to assert dominance. But fate has a way of turning tables when least expected. The judge had been in his position for over 2 decades, and during that time, he had mastered the art of bending the law to suit his needs. He wasn't just corrupt, he was cunning. Over the years, he had built a network of allies: wealthy, businessmen, shady lawyers, and even a few politicians who owed him favors. Together, they formed a tight-knit circle where money talked louder than morality. If you wanted a favorable verdict in his courtroom, all you had to do was pay the right price. And if you didn't play by his rules, well, things could get messy. For Jasmine, this particular case began like any other. A single mother had come to her seeking help. The woman's ex-husband, a man with a history of violence and anger issues, was fighting for full custody of their 2 young children. Despite his abusive behavior, he had managed to sway the system in his favor thanks to deep pockets and connections. The mother, on the other hand, was struggling to make ends meet, working long hours at a low-paying job while trying to provide a stable home for her kids. To her, losing custody felt like losing everything. Jasmine knew the odds were stacked against them. Custody battles involving domestic abuse often became complicated, especially when one side had resources to manipulate the narrative. But she also knew that the truth mattered more than anything else. So she dug deeper into the case, poring over documents, interviewing witnesses, and uncovering evidence that painted a clear picture of the ex-husband's violent tendencies. What she found shocked her. Not only did the man have a documented history of aggression, but he was also connected to the judge overseeing the case. It didn't take long for Jasmine to realize something was off. In several previous cases, the same judge had ruled in favor of individuals linked to the ex-husband's business dealings. Coincidence? Jasmine didn't believe in coincidences, not when so much was at stake. She started digging further, sifting through public records and following paper trails that led her to unsettling discoveries. Emails, financial transactions, and whispered conversations hinted at a pattern of corruption. This wasn't just about one biased ruling. It was part of a larger scheme designed to protect those with power and influence. But Jasmine wasn't the type to back down. Instead, she used what she uncovered to strengthen her case. She gathered affidavits from neighbors who witnessed the ex-husband's abusive behavior, obtained medical reports detailing injuries sustained by the mother, and even tracked down former employees of the ex-husband who were willing to testify about his volatile personality. Every piece of evidence added weight to her argument, making it harder for anyone, including the judge, to ignore the facts. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, however, the judge was watching her every move. He had heard whispers about her relentless pursuit of justice and saw firsthand how she dismantled cases others deemed impossible to win. Her growing reputation made him uneasy. If someone like her continued exposing flaws in the system, it wouldn't be long before people started asking questions that could unravel his carefully constructed facade. Determined to stop her, the judge devised a plan. He decided to use the upcoming hearing as an opportunity to humiliate Jasmine in front of everyone. After all, what better way to silence a rising star than to crush her confidence and credibility in open court? He believed that if he could discredit her professionalism and portray her as reckless or unprepared, no one would take her seriously again. It was a calculated move, one he thought would solidify his dominance while sending a chilling message to anyone else considering challenging him. As the hearing date approached, tension filled the air. The courtroom was packed with spectators eager to see how the drama would unfold. On one side sat the single mother, clutching your script, hearing her hands nervously, hoping for a miracle. On the other side stood the ex-husband, flanked by his expensive legal team, radiating arrogance. And then there was Jasmine, calm yet focused, ready to present her case. Little did she know that the judge had already scripted his attack, planning to strike the moment she opened her mouth. What neither the judge nor anyone else realized was that Jasmine had one final card up her sleeve, a revelation so explosive it would turn the tables completely. For now, though, all eyes were on the courtroom, waiting to see whether justice would prevail or whether power and corruption would triumph once again. The courtroom was packed to the brim, buzzing with anticipation. Every seat was taken. Spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers filled the room. Some had come to support the single mother. Others were there because they'd heard about Jasmine's reputation and wanted to see her in action. The atmosphere was tense, almost electric, as everyone waited for the hearing to begin. The judge entered the room, his robe flowing behind him, exuding an air of authority that seemed to demand silence. He took his seat at the bench, glancing around the room with a look that could only be described as smug satisfaction. Jasmine stood at the podium, her posture straight but relaxed. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the room before settling on the judge. She knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. Something about the way he looked at her, a mix of disdain and amusement, told her he had something planned. Still, she refused to let it rattle her. This wasn't her first time facing adversity, and it certainly wouldn't be her last. Her focus remained on the case, on the frightened mother sitting anxiously behind her, hoping for justice. The proceedings began, and Jasmine launched into her opening statement. Her voice was steady, clear, and full of conviction as she laid out the facts of the case. She spoke about the mother's dedication to her children, her efforts to provide a safe home despite financial struggles, and the undeniable pattern of abuse inflicted by the ex-husband. Every word she said was backed by evidence, documents, testimonies, and expert opinions that painted a vivid picture of what was at stake. The spectators listened intently, nodding along as she spoke. But just as she was building momentum, the judge interrupted her mid-sentence. "Ms. Crockett," he said sharply, his tone dripping with condescension, "is this really necessary? We don't have all day for dramatic storytelling." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some people exchanging confused glances. Jasmine paused, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Your Honor," she replied calmly, "every detail matters when the well-being of two innocent children is on the line." Her composure seemed to irritate him further. Over the next few minutes, he repeatedly cut her off, nitpicking minor technicalities and dismissing key points of her argument. At one point, he leaned forward, his voice rising as he accused her of wasting the court's time. "You seem awfully eager to turn this into a spectacle," he sneered. "Perhaps you should focus less on theatrics and more on actual law." His words hung heavy in the air, and for a brief moment, the room fell silent. Jasmine didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she took a deep breath and responded with measured calmness. "If ensuring that the truth comes to light is considered theatrics, then yes, Your Honor, I am guilty as charged. But I assure you, my goal here is not drama. It's justice." Her words resonated with the audience, earning subtle nods of approval from those watching closely. Even some of the court staff exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with how the judge was behaving. Still, he pressed on, determined to make her squirm. He mocked her approach, questioned her competence, and even made snide remarks about her background. "It must be challenging," he said with feigned sympathy, "to step into a courtroom without the privilege of proper connections or resources." His jab was obvious, meant to undermine her credibility and remind everyone of her humble roots. But instead of shrinking under his verbal assault, Jasmine stood taller. She fixed him with a piercing stare, her expression unshaken. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I may not come from privilege, but I do come prepared. And if you're done trying to embarrass me, perhaps we can focus on what truly matters, the safety and future of these children." The room erupted in murmurs again, this time tinged with admiration. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the unfolding drama. For many, it was impossible not to root for the young lawyer standing up to a figure of authority who seemed intent on bullying her. As the hearing continued, the tension escalated. The judge grew increasingly agitated, his interruptions more frequent and pointed. But Jasmine remained composed, deflecting each attack with grace and precision. It was like watching a chess match, except the stakes were far higher than any game. Each move she made was deliberate, calculated, and rooted in the belief that fairness would ultimately prevail. What no one realized, not even the judge himself, was that Jasmine had anticipated this behavior. She knew he would try to intimidate her, to throw her off balance. That's why she had prepared more than just her legal arguments. Hidden within her files were documents that told a story far bigger than the custody battle at hand. Documents that implicated the judge himself. For now, though, she kept them close, waiting for the right moment to strike. Because while the judge thought he was in control, weaving his web of humiliation, Jasmine was quietly setting the stage for something far greater. The courtroom watched, unaware that the real showdown was yet to come, and when it did, it would leave everyone speechless. The judge's smug expression didn't waver as he leaned back in his chair, clearly convinced he had rattled Jasmine enough to derail her case. To him, this was just another day of flexing his authority, using the courtroom as his personal stage, to remind everyone who held the power. But what he didn't realize was that Jasmine wasn't just defending a client, she was fighting for something much bigger. And she had come prepared. As the hearing progressed, Jasmine shifted gears. She began presenting evidence that directly tied the ex-husband's violent behavior to documented incidents. Medical records, police reports, and witness testimonies painted a damning picture. The crowd listened intently, their faces reflecting growing unease at the stark reality of the abuse. Even the opposing lawyer seemed uncomfortable, glancing nervously at his client. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. "Your Honor," she said, pausing briefly to let her words sink in. "There's one more piece of evidence I'd like to present." Her tone was calm but deliberate, almost too casual for someone about to drop a bombshell. She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of printed emails. The judge frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What is this now?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. Jasmine didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the bailiff and handed him the documents, instructing him to pass them to the judge. As the papers made their way to the bench, Jasmine turned to address the room. "These emails were obtained during my investigation. They reveal communications between the opposing party," she gestured toward the ex-husband, "and individuals within the legal system." The judge froze as he flipped through the pages. His face went pale, though he tried to mask it with a scowl. The emails detailed explicit exchanges where favors were promised in exchange for favorable rulings. Worse still, they showed direct correspondence between the ex-husband and none other than the judge himself. The implications were undeniable. The judge had accepted bribes to manipulate the outcome of cases. Before he could recover, Jasmine pressed on. "I understand these revelations may be difficult to process, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "But given the severity of the situation, I believe transparency is essential, for the sake of fairness and for the children involved. I must insist we address this immediately." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. People whispered to each other, exchanging shocked glances. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while others scrambled to type updates on their phones. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Even the court staff looked uneasy, unsure how to handle such an unprecedented moment. The judge slammed his gavel down hard, trying to regain control. "Enough," he barked, his voice shaking slightly. "This is outrageous. These documents are fabricated nonsense meant to slander me." His attempt to sound authoritative fell flat. Instead, he came across as defensive and cornered. Jasmine remained unfazed. "If these emails are indeed false, then proving so should be simple," she countered smoothly. "However, there's more." With that, she reached into her bag again and pulled out a small digital recorder. Holding it up for everyone to see, she pressed play. The recording crackled to life, filling the silent courtroom with voices. It was unmistakably the judge's voice, discussing details of the custody case with the ex-husband. He spoke casually about ensuring a specific verdict, promising to take care of things in exchange for certain assurances. The audio was crystal clear, leaving no room for doubt. Gasps rippled through the room as people absorbed what they were hearing. Some covered their mouths in disbelief, while others shook their heads in disgust. The judge's face turned red, his composure crumbling under the weight of the evidence. He stood abruptly, shouting, "This is preposterous. I won't tolerate being framed." But Jasmine wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "If you truly believe this is a fabrication, then I suggest we involve law enforcement immediately. Let them verify the authenticity of these documents and recordings." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before adding, "After all, justice demands nothing less." For a moment, the room was utterly silent. All eyes were on the judge, waiting to see how he would respond. His usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by panic. He glanced around wildly, searching for an escape route, but there was none. Every exit was blocked, not by physical barriers but by the truth staring him down. Finally, he sank back into his chair, defeated. His shoulders slumped and his hands trembled as he stared blankly at the papers in front of him. The man who had spent years manipulating the system for personal gain was now trapped in his own web of lies. Jasmine took a step back, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle over the courtroom. She didn't need to say anything else. The evidence spoke for itself. Around her, people exchanged awestruck looks, some nodding in approval, others whispering prayers of gratitude. For the single mother sitting behind her, tears streamed down her face, not of sadness but of relief. Justice, it seemed, was finally within reach. But this wasn't just a victory for one family. It was a turning point. The judge's downfall sent shockwaves through the legal community, exposing cracks in a system many had blindly trusted. And as the officers arrived to escort him out, Jasmine stood tall, knowing she had done far more than win a case. She had ignited a spark that would shine a light on corruption, inspiring others to demand accountability and fairness. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law and order. It had become a stage for something far more dramatic. As the judge sat slumped in his chair, the weight of the evidence crushing him, Jasmine felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. There was anger. Anger at how someone in his position could abuse power so recklessly. There was relief that the truth had finally come to light. And there was determination that this moment wouldn't be wasted. Before anyone could fully process what was happening, two officers entered the room. They approached the bench cautiously but with purpose. The judge's eyes darted between them, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. He tried to sound authoritative, but it came out weak, almost desperate. The officers didn't respond immediately. Instead, they exchanged a glance before one of them spoke. "Sir, we need you to step down from the bench." The judge shot up from his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the bench like he was trying to steady himself. "This is absurd," he shouted, his voice echoing through the silent room. "You can't do this. These accusations are baseless. They're lies." His protests fell on deaf ears. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the officers moved closer, their presence unyielding. For once, the man who had spent years commanding respect and instilling fear was utterly powerless. Jasmine stood quietly, observing the scene unfold. She didn't gloat or smirk. Instead, she kept her focus on the bigger picture. This wasn't about humiliating the judge. It was about holding him accountable. Still, she couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. All those late nights spent digging through documents, all those moments when she doubted herself had led to this pivotal moment. Justice wasn't blind after all. It simply required people willing to fight for it. As the officers placed handcuffs around the judge's wrists, a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. It was surreal to see someone in such a position of authority led away like any other criminal. Reporters sprang into action, snapping photos and shouting questions. Flashbulbs popped, illuminating the room like lightning strikes. Spectators leaned forward, craning their necks to get a better view. Some whispered prayers, others murmured words of disbelief. No one could quite believe what they were witnessing. The judge resisted as much as he could, his protests growing louder. "This is a setup, a conspiracy," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. But his words only made him look guiltier. People shook their heads, disgusted by the spectacle. Even those who might have once respected him now saw him for what he truly was, a fraud, a manipulator, and a hypocrite. When the officers finally escorted him out of the courtroom, the doors swung shut behind them, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then slowly the room erupted into murmurs. People turned to each other, sharing thoughts, opinions, and reactions. Some clapped softly, while others wiped tears from their eyes. The single mother sitting behind Jasmine reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Jasmine nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. But Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. While the immediate battle had been won, the war against corruption was far from over. As the crowd began to disperse, reporters swarmed her, shoving microphones in her face and firing off rapid-fire questions. "How did you uncover this evidence? What happens next? Do you think this will lead to broader investigations?" Jasmine held up a hand, signaling for calm. "One thing at a time," she said firmly. "Today, we focus on ensuring justice for these children and their mother. Tomorrow, we'll talk about everything else." Her response seemed to satisfy the reporters, at least temporarily. Cameras flashed as she gathered her files and prepared to leave the courtroom. Outside, the scene was chaotic. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Crowds had gathered, drawn by the buzz of what had happened inside. When Jasmine stepped out, flanked by security, cheers erupted. Strangers clapped, whistled, and called out words of gratitude. For many, she was more than a lawyer. She was a symbol of hope, proof that even the most entrenched systems of power could be challenged. Later that evening, as Jasmine sat alone in her office, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. She stared at the stack of papers on her desk, still unable to fully process everything that had transpired. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers congratulating her. Social media was ablaze with posts praising her courage and tenacity. Yet despite the accolades, Jasmine felt grounded. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about doing the right thing. She picked up a pen and jotted down notes for her next steps. The judge's arrest was just the beginning. His web of corruption likely extended far beyond this one case, involving others who needed to be exposed. Jasmine knew she couldn't tackle it all alone, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The public outrage sparked by today's events would fuel calls for accountability. Lawmakers, activists, and everyday citizens would demand answers and reforms. As she packed up her things and turned off the lights, Jasmine allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the single mother, whose life had been forever changed by today's outcome. She thought about the children, who would grow up knowing their voices mattered. And she thought about the countless others who still suffered silently under the weight of injustice. Tonight, they had reason to hope, and tomorrow she would continue fighting. For them, for fairness, and for a world where no one was above the law. The days following the dramatic courtroom showdown were a whirlwind for Jasmine. News of the corrupt judge's arrest spread like wildfire, dominating headlines and sparking heated discussions across the country. People couldn't stop talking about the young lawyer who had stood up to power, exposing corruption in a way that felt almost cinematic. For many, it was the kind of story they didn't think happened in real life. A David versus Goliath tale where justice triumphed against all odds. Reporters camped outside Jasmine's office, hoping to catch even a glimpse of her. Talk shows extended invitations, eager to have her share her side of the story. Social media buzzed with hashtags praising her courage, while memes celebrating her victory went viral. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her, their eyes filled with admiration. Some called her a hero. Others said she gave them hope. But amidst the chaos, Jasmine stayed grounded. She knew the attention wasn't about her. It was about the message she represented: accountability. Despite the frenzy surrounding her, Jasmine refused to let it distract her from the work that still needed to be done. The judge's downfall had opened a Pandora's box, revealing cracks in the legal system that couldn't be ignored. Investigations quickly expanded beyond his case, uncovering ties to other officials, lawyers, and wealthy individuals who had benefited from his corrupt network. Arrests followed one after another, sending shockwaves through the community. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of abuse and manipulation. Jasmine worked tirelessly, cooperating with authorities to provide evidence and testimony. She spent hours poring over documents, answering questions, and helping investigators piece together the puzzle. It was exhausting, but she never complained. Every late night, every missed meal, every moment of fatigue was worth it if it meant bringing more wrongdoers to justice. Her dedication inspired others to come forward, sharing their own stories of how the system had failed them. What started as one woman's fight soon grew into a collective movement for change. But not everyone was happy about the developments. Powerful figures whose secrets were being exposed pushed back hard, using their influence to discredit Jasmine and undermine the investigation. They accused her of having ulterior motives, questioned her methods, and even tried to paint her as reckless. Some launched smear campaigns, spreading lies and distortions to tarnish her reputation. Yet, Jasmine remained unfazed. She understood that resistance was inevitable when challenging deeply entrenched systems of power. Instead of letting the negativity get to her, she doubled down on her mission, focusing on facts rather than fear-mongering. In the midst of everything, Jasmine made time to visit the single mother and her children. Their custody case had been resolved in their favor, thanks to the overwhelming evidence Jasmine presented. The ex-husband, now implicated in the corruption scandal, faced multiple charges and lost any chance of gaining custody. For the first time in years, the mother felt safe. When Jasmine arrived at their modest home, the kids ran to greet her, hugging her tightly. "You saved us," the mother said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you." Jasmine knelt down to meet the children's gaze, smiling warmly. "You don't need to thank me," she replied gently. "Just promise me you'll always stand up for what's right no matter how hard it seems." The kids nodded earnestly, their wide eyes reflecting innocence and trust. In that moment, Jasmine felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was why she did what she did, not for fame or recognition, but to make a difference in people's lives. As weeks turned into months, the impact of Jasmine's actions continued to ripple outward. Lawmakers introduced new bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within the legal system. Activists organized rallies, demanding reforms and calling for stricter oversight of judges and officials. Schools invited Jasmine to speak to students, inspiring the next generation to pursue justice fearlessly. Her story became a beacon of hope, proving that even ordinary people could spark extraordinary change. Yet, despite the progress, Jasmine knew there was still much work to be done. Corruption didn't disappear overnight, and systemic issues required long-term solutions. But she also knew that momentum was on her side. People were waking up, realizing they had the power to demand better, and as long as there were voices willing to speak out, the fight for justice would continue. One evening, as Jasmine sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on everything that had happened. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and sheer exhaustion. But through it all, she had stayed true to herself and her values. She thought about the single mother and her children, now free from fear. She thought about the countless others who had found courage because of her example, and she thought about the future, knowing that while challenges lay ahead, so did opportunities. For Jasmine, this was just the beginning. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore, she was a catalyst for change. And as the sky painted itself in hues of orange and pink, she felt a quiet determination settle over her. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new obstacles, and new victories. But one thing was certain: she would keep fighting for fairness, for integrity, and for a world where justice truly belonged to everyone. Months had passed since the day Jasmine stood in that courtroom and turned the tables on a corrupt judge. Life had changed for her in ways she never imagined. The spotlight that once felt overwhelming became a tool she used to amplify her message. People listened when she spoke, not because they were curious about her fame, but because they believed in her cause. She traveled across cities, speaking at conferences, community centers, and schools, sharing her story and urging others to take a stand against injustice. Her days were busy, filled with meetings, interviews, and endless phone calls. But Jasmine made it a point to stay connected to the people who mattered most, the ones whose lives were directly affected by the broken system. She visited neighborhoods where poverty and inequality thrived, listening to their struggles and offering guidance wherever she could. She reminded them that change didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it started with small acts of courage. "Speak up," she often told them. "Your voice matters more than you think." The custody case that sparked everything became a symbol of hope for many. The single mother and her children moved into a safer home, thanks to support from local charities inspired by Jasmine's advocacy. The kids flourished in school, free from the fear of violence and uncertainty. Their laughter echoed through their new house, a sound that brought tears to their mother's eyes. Whenever Jasmine visited, she saw how far they'd come, not just physically but emotionally. They were healing, rebuilding their lives brick by brick. And every time she left their home, she carried a renewed sense of purpose. But while progress was being made, Jasmine knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption didn't vanish overnight, and those who benefited from unfair systems fought back fiercely. Some officials tried to downplay the scandal, claiming it was an isolated incident rather than part of a larger issue. Others lobbied against reforms, arguing that increased oversight would slow things down or create unnecessary bureaucracy. Jasmine countered these arguments with facts and stories, real-life examples of how corruption hurt ordinary people. She refused to let anyone rewrite history or sweep the truth under the rug. Her efforts paid off. Lawmakers began drafting stronger regulations to hold judges and officials accountable. Transparency measures were introduced, requiring public access to court records and financial disclosures. Activist groups formed watchdog committees to monitor legal proceedings and report misconduct. What started as one woman's battle evolved into a nationwide movement, fueled by collective outrage and determination. People realized they weren't powerless. They could demand better, and together, they did. Jasmine also found herself mentoring young lawyers eager to follow in her footsteps. Many looked up to her as a role model, someone who proved that integrity and hard work could overcome even the toughest challenges. She spent hours advising them, encouraging them to stay resilient, despite setbacks. "There will be days when you feel like giving up," she told them during one session. "But remember why you started. Remember the people counting on you, that's what keeps me going." As the months went by, Jasmine noticed something remarkable. The tide was shifting. Conversations around accountability and fairness became mainstream. Journalists dug deeper into cases of corruption, uncovering scandals that might otherwise have stayed hidden. Citizens grew bolder, filing complaints and organizing protests. Even within the legal profession, there was a push for self-reflection. Judges, lawyers, and clerks began holding themselves to higher standards, knowing the world was watching. One evening, Jasmine attended a ceremony honoring individuals who had contributed to positive social change. As she accepted an award, the crowd erupted in applause. Standing on stage, she scanned the room, taking in the faces of people from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, powerful and powerless. Each of them had played a role in this journey, whether big or small. It wasn't just her victory. It belonged to everyone who had dared to believe in a better future. "I didn't do this alone," Jasmine said, her voice steady yet heartfelt. "This is your win too. Every person who stood up, who spoke out, who refused to stay silent, they're the real heroes here. Together we showed that no one is above the law, no matter how untouchable they seem." After the event, Jasmine walked home under the stars, her mind replaying the night's events. She thought about how far she'd come, from a young girl, dreaming of fairness to a woman leading a movement for justice. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Along the way, she learned valuable lessons about resilience, compassion, and the power of unity. Most importantly, she discovered that true strength lies not in fighting alone, but in inspiring others to join the fight. As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, Jasmine smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to wage. But she welcomed them with open arms, knowing she wasn't alone. There were millions standing beside her, ready to face whatever came next. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of peace, a quiet celebration of how far they'd come and how much farther they could go. And so, Jasmine continued her mission, one step at a time. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing: the fight for justice never truly ended. It evolved, adapted, and grew stronger with each passing day. And as long as there were people willing to stand up, speak out, and demand fairness, the arc of history would bend toward justice.